Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. It is April. We are less than a month away from the NFL draft, so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. We've got Mario's updated rookie top 50 and a first-round mock to get into. So a lot here going on this show. Let's get it rolling. Welcome into the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, John McKechnie, joined as always by Mario Puig. Special guest today, Dulce on the camera. If you're watching the live stream, you get to enjoy the true bliss and joy that Dulce brings to the pod here. So good stuff, Mario.
Yeah, she was getting into something in the corner, and I had to go get her during the intro just now.
probably that little peek behind the curtain for the listeners out there too.
This is basically what I do all the podcasts. I just keep it, I keep myself in frame better usually.
Excellent. And let's see here. Just went to Augusta on Monday. Caught the Masters practice round. That was pretty nuts. Got a nice little sunburn. I'm also wearing my little Masters shirt, so I'm all in, despite being about as casual of a golf fan as you could possibly imagine. But anywho, why don't we get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode? We're going to roll through your mock draft and then just kind of weave in some of the players that are on your top 50. Obviously, your top 50 is fantasy related, and obviously we're running into a situation in this mock where there aren't going to be 32 fantasy relevant guys running through it, but let's get things rolling. Where are the Jags going with the number one overall pick? Do they keep it? And if so, do any of their offseason moves steer you in one way, or do you think it's the odds-on favorite, which is Aiden Hutchinson?
Yeah, I would guess it's Hutchinson, but who knows? I mean, to me, he's not clearly the best player in the draft or anything like that. I think he's the public consensus, safest player in the draft. And that could matter in this case because Trent Baalke knows that the seat is hot and that he's kind of got a lot of eyes on him now. People are kind of onto his bit, and they're not very fond of it. They're tired of it. So one thing he could do to make people that much more mad at him would be to take instead Trayvon Walker or some other player other than Hutchinson, who is basically the public's favorite and the odds-on favorite right now. So I think even if maybe Baalke in another scenario might take Walker, which funny enough, I actually think is totally reasonable. The public does not think that's totally reasonable though. So if he's feeling the heat, he might go with Hutchinson just to kind of be like, hey, if he sucks, you can't get mad at me on this one.
So how hard of it was it in terms of making that call for you to lead off the mock with Hutchinson with those factors in mind? How close were you to going with a Trayvon Walker or, I guess Kayvon Thibodeau to a lesser extent there with that first pick?
Yeah, it seems like Thibodeau's kind of soured the league a little bit on him. I think he's out of the top 5 probably, even though there's a pretty good case to have him up as high as that first pick, like you said. I think Evan Neal, the tackle from Alabama, would have been the ideal pick there for the Jaguars, but they put the franchise tag on Cam Robinson, which I don't know why. And given that they already have Walker Little in the second round last year and Jamar Taylor in the second round 2 or 3 years ago or whatever, it seems pretty unlikely that they'll take Neal unless they somehow trade Cam Robinson before the draft, which doesn't seem likely. That would be the only way. So yeah, I think it's not ideal that they're ending up there. I don't think Robinson's that good, and I think Neal could be really good. I think Neal's probably the best player in the draft, but Hutchinson is at a need at more of a need if they hold on to Robinson, which it seems like they will.
Okay, all right. So looking at the odds, we got the odds displayed over on RotoWire.com. Go to the RotoWire.com/betting/NFL. You can go to the player futures. We got first, second overall, and third overall pick odds. So right now, Hutchinson is minus 250 at most places, minus 280 in others, but minus 250, the best price you'll get on him over at FanDuel. Trayvon Walker next up, plus 350, and then we get into those offensive tackles that you were mentioning. Ekwonu from NC State, and of course Evan Neal from Alabama, 1,200 and 1,500 respectively are their odds. So feels like there's only a small range of outcomes for what the Jags are going to do first overall. I think things get really interesting with that second pick with the Detroit Lions. Obviously, that much has been made, and we've made a lot about how thin and weak this quarterback class is overall. But even still, is Malik Willis a true option for the Lions at 2?
I think so. I don't know what they're most likely to do. It might not be in their nature to look at Willis there. Like, I don't, what is it? Is Holmes? I can't remember the name of that new GM that they got from the Rams. If he somehow thinks it's clever to go with Goff and, just keep getting high picks and keep spending them on non-quarterbacks every year, if he thinks that's the sharp thing to do, then they could, trade back here certainly. But otherwise, if they stay at 2, they could take pretty much anybody that we've named, I guess outside of the offensive tackles. Obviously, they got Decker and Sewell there. On defense, though, pretty much anybody in the top 10 discussion, you can kind of say Detroit makes sense for them because they need help pretty much everywhere, especially corner, I guess you would say. So I'm higher on Derek Stingley than I guess most people. I can't tell if that's one of those things like most people actually like Stingley and it's the league that's souring on him, or maybe the league and normal people all like Stingley and it's just the media getting something wrong. I don't know. Stingley doesn't appear to be an option for them at 2, and I don't think the Cincinnati corner Gardner is a serious consideration there. So unless they're looking at that safety Hamilton, I think Detroit would, in the event that they pass on Malik Willis, probably be looking at Trayvon Walker and I would say Thibodeau, but I guess I don't really see him as a fit for them. Right? Like, I'd be surprised if they targeted him. So yeah, I'd say Walker, but I really think they should take Willis because he's got rough aspects of his game, of course, but if he's so raw when they bring him in, then it's an excuse to let Goff run out another year, and maybe you can flip him to some stupid team for a 4th rounder, or at least get out of the money that they owe him, and then go with Willis. But if they pass on Willis here and they just assume they're going to get a better shot later, next year in the 1st round, that would be pretty reckless. Even if Willis is risky, I think it's more risky to pass on him and just assume something better will happen later.
Right, because I think if you try to play the long game like that and try to get like a year ahead as far as like these quarterback prospects are concerned, you can definitely get burned. Like say DJ Uiagalelei was a sophomore 2 years ago, so being a junior this year, he would have. If a team wanted to play that type of strategy and say like, okay, we're going to tank for DJU, and then he had the season that he just did, you're kind of sunk. Like, if you're tanking with the expectation that Sam Howell is going to end up being that number 1 guy, you were sorely mistaken there as well. So it's really hard to forecast the quarterback development from year to year in college and how it's going to translate in the NFL. I don't even think that Willis Willis was a guy that this time last year was viewed as pretty much all tools. And I think the discussion is mostly the same there, but I think that just the way that the other quarterbacks in this class have played their way out of the running for number 1, it's like, okay, at least Willis has tools that you could see if it works out, then it could be huge.
Yeah, and you're probably especially banking on the recent lessons of, I guess, Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. And I know Willis is not like them. I know he's 6'1", 225 or whatever instead of being 6'6", 240, whatever those two are. But it's not so much the height and the weight specifically that makes Allen and Herbert so effective right now. It's more the really strong arm, the arm that can threaten vertically anywhere on the field with a quick release, and the running ability and the frame to kind of keep acting on that rushing threat with the quarterback underneath. Like, Willis isn't as big as those two, but he's just as densely built. Like, he can run 12 times a game. That's not a big deal to someone with his kind of frame. And if he can run 12 times a game and it's at vaguely the level that it was in college, then even if he's a bad passer, teams are going to have to start paying attention to that underneath rushing threat. And then if they want to pay too much attention to it, then the vertical threat comes in again. And you can kind of just sort of keep the defense off balance and kind of spread thin that way. And I think particularly with the illegal contact rules being first implemented like 20 years ago and then re-emphasized 10 years ago or whatever that was already. It's like that, for some reason, that ability to act on the rushing threat underneath and that vertical, high velocity, high distance throw vertically, that is just too much for defenses to deal with right now. It's like you end up having to leave somebody in coverage that you needed to have spying on the rush threat or vice versa, and you just never really seem to get ahead of the count. So I think Willis falls in that category. And crucially, beside that, he seems to be a really hard worker, and guys seem to like playing for him. So nowadays, it seems like the best you can do finding a quarterback prospect is just find somebody who's a really hard worker, who leads vaguely well, and has some amount of athletic tools to mold, and then you just kind of like have to hope they figure it out.
So kind of putting you on the spot here, but if Detroit doesn't go Willis at 2, how far down does he land? Is there anyone else in the top 10 that you could see that's currently in the top 10 at least that you could see taking the plunge on him? Or do you think that would kind of open the floodgates to where, teams picking in the early teens might consider moving up?
Yeah. If I was the Jaguars, I'd really try to find out what the Lions plan to do with that pick, because I don't know. If Willis does not go off the board at the second pick, if he's on the board at the third pick, I think that third pick is trading out. So that's the Texans. Somebody will trade up for him, I think, if the Lions don't take him. It might be Carolina, might be somebody else, but I don't think he's going to fall unimpeded to the 6th pick, where I would imagine if he does, the Panthers would take him there, though.
Yeah, they pretty much have to. It'll be interesting to see what how the board falls for
I guess
them.
The Giants they have 2 picks in the first 7 selections, so they'd be pretty easy to to afford and justify moving up to the first pick or the second pick or the third pick.
No, yeah, absolutely. And, you got a totally new regime there. They're not wedded to Daniel Jones, so nor should they have been regardless. But I digress. Looking at Willis from the fantasy lens, where does he fall in your rookie ranks for this class?
I think in one quarterback, he'd be for dynasty purpose, he'd be like 7 or 8. And in Superflex, I guess there's a case to have him, first overall pick. So part of the reason you can kind of feel, I think, more secure than you would maybe guess as a Willis investor is simply that if he has success in the NFL, he needs to actualize that rushing threat. Like, they need to act on that. And if he is acting on that rushing threat, then he can kind of get away with being a bad passer and still be pretty good in fantasy. So there really is a high floor there for at least a couple of years, I think. Not to just assume he'll start in 2022, but whenever he starts starting, I think, he's got like 2.5 years at least as a worst case scenario. And I think he could play poorly in real life terms and still be like a top 12 fantasy quarterback, because he's probably the second most dangerous rushing threat at quarterback. And I don't mean one play. Like, Kyler Murray is about as dangerous as Lamar Jackson on one play, but he can't do it over as much volume as Lamar, which is why Lamar is far and away the best. I think when you consider the volume aspect along with the explosiveness aspect, Willis will be the second most dangerous rushing quarterback in the NFL, like him or Lance or something.
Okay.
So he could run for like 700, 800 yards, like that would not be surprising.
No, it really wouldn't. That he showed it time and time again at Liberty over the course of these last 2 seasons, just how dangerous he can be as a rushing threat. And the passing production, the highlight film, the pro day, all that underlines it, that he's got a great arm on top of the athleticism as well. Let's get on over to our next skill guy. We just talked about the Panthers for a second, what they might do at 6. In this particular scenario, obviously Willis is off the board at 2. Do the Panthers stay the course and go with the quarterback, even if Willis is gone?
Yeah, somebody's going to take Kenny Pickett, and I don't think it's going to be a team that ever wins now or in the next 4 years. So it's going to be the Panthers, I think, because either the intel that he's so coveted as a first-round pick is wrong, or a team like the Panthers needs to make that pick. And if the Panthers don't, I don't know who's, there's 2 or 3 teams stupid enough to believe that. And the Panthers are definitely one. The Panthers are so reckless and dysfunctional right now. They don't really need to believe anything in particular to do anything in particular. They're going haywire. And if they get to that 6th overall pick and, you're Matt Rule, you think of it from his angle. He's like, I know the only way I'm staying employed another year and a half is if I have some sort of new hope for the franchise that is attributed to me. Like I need to get 2 or 3 promising starts from some rookie quarterback and I can get another year or 2 out of this racket, But if he doesn't have a rookie quarterback and they go 2-15 or whatever they will this year, then he's just getting fired in, I don't know, October. But if you're losing and you have a rookie quarterback and you get fans and media deluded into thinking that there's some sort of hope, he can stay employed. So he's going to be in favor of Pickett, even if he thinks he's a bum, even if he thinks it's a crap pick. That's his most rational option if he wants to stay employed. And then Tepper, the owner, is just a stupid guy who, you can imagine him sort of just looking at it as, you got to take a quarterback when you're with the 1st round pick, and and a quarterback, of course, needs to look like Mr. Touchdown USA, and maybe Kenny Pickett will strike that aesthetic to him.
Oh, and isn't Tepper a Pittsburgh guy?
Oh man, let's just assume this is the pick then.
Let's put our Yins cap on.
I'm gonna go edit the Wikipedia page right now for the 2022 NFL Draft.
I hope I wasn't slandering Tepper there and just assuming that he's from Pittsburgh or
slander
something.
Him. Don't slander. It's Pittsburgh you're slandering there.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think the listeners know my feelings about Pittsburgh, but okay, all right. So let's keep it rolling. So we got a lot of defensive players here in the top 10. Do we start to see a run at receiver somewhere early, right around that 10th pick?
Yeah, if the Jets don't trade that 10th pick for a veteran receiver, they're going to take a receiver at that pick. And in this projection, I gave them Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson's good. I think he's also overrated. I don't think he's a better prospect than Elijah Moore, but there's still a pretty good case for taking Wilson at 10. It's more like Elijah Moore probably shouldn't have fallen as far as he did. It could be that that's true, and Wilson is also worth this 10th pick. It would be bad for his fantasy interest, of course, or at least I'm not optimistic about Zach Wilson. I think he could, I don't know, maybe be like a top 20 NFL quarterback, but I'd be pretty I think it'd be greedy to hope for more than that. And if he's only that, then particularly while he's still young, there might not be a big enough pie there to make all of Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, Garrett Wilson, those 2 tight ends that they signed. Maybe the pie isn't big enough to make everybody happy, especially the fantasy investors of all those players. But it would be a good player at a position that the Jets could use one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if they're all in on Wilson, it definitely makes sense for them.
It's a receiver for sure. They tried to get Tyreek Hill, and they've been bothering the Titans, and the Titans are telling them to stop calling them about AJ Brown.
Just want the Corey Davis, AJ Brown reunion in the big axe at receiver then.
Sorry, I think my connection cut out for like 10 seconds there.
Oh, no, you're good. Who you got? Who's the next receiver coming off the board and where? Yeah,
another bummer. You don't want to be the pick at 11 overall where we have the Washington, whatever they're called, and they're given in this projection Drake London, which I would hate for Drake London. Carson Wentz is terrible, really, really bad, no good. And Washington, of course, is a rotten organization. Dan Snyder is one of the, many Hydra heads that we could conceptualize Satan as. He's one of them, one of those many heads. And did I just lose John there? Oh, I guess I did. I'm just going to hope John gets back online here, or that I am not offline talking to myself right now. But Drake London, of course.
Sorry.
Oh, hey, John. Hey. Yeah, so Drake London, it's a punishment for him to go 11th overall to Washington, but I think it's pretty easy to rationalize it from Washington's angle. It's a bummer for him. But Drake London, he was supposed to have his pro day like yesterday, and they postponed it for supposedly another injury reason. I guess we'll see. I can't remember what date. Maybe like the 15th of April or something like that. So, excuse me. If he runs like a 4.6 at that pro day workout, he might not be a consideration at 11. But as long as he runs like a 4-5, if he runs like a 4-5-5 sort of thing, then I almost would be surprised if he fell out of the top 12 at that point.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And, it is a little bit concerning that we're this far along. We had the scheduled pro day and had to move it back because of the ankle that cut his last season at USC short. But, if everything checks out, then I could see him definitely being the second receiver off the board. I want to move down a little bit further in this mock later in the teens. I think this is one of my favorite potential pick pairings. That would be the Chargers taking a flyer, not necessarily a flyer, it's a first-round pick, on Jamison Williams out of Alabama. Obviously, he tore his ACL in the national championship game, but the production and everything before then was everything pointed to him being the most explosive, dangerous receiver in all of college football. I think, if that injury didn't happen, he's the first receiver off the board. So the Chargers potentially getting him at 17 would be, a massive boon. You already have Mike Williams. You already have Keenan Allen in the fold. So you don't need to you're not relying on Jamison Williams coming right in and having to eat up all these targets. You can kind of ease him in a little bit. And then, once he's ready to rock, now all of a sudden Justin Herbert has a legit deep threat in a way that he just really hasn't yet to this point in his NFL career.
Yeah, I think Brandon Staley has shown some concerning inclinations. I don't know that I trust him to figure everything out at this point, but he's not a dumb guy. So I do think he'll figure out, generally speaking, he'll figure out more as time goes along. And with this thing being so inescapably obvious, the fact that they need some speed on that offense to push the safeties back, you gotta you have to think about how you create space as an offense to imagine how you're going to go anywhere. You gotta think about how the speed of your best vertical threat, how that turns into an analogy of flipping over an hourglass with the sand in it, and it's how fast that sand goes down on the defense has to do with how fast that safety gets pushed back by those receivers. You want to make the defense feel like the sand is running out on them, and Jamison Williams gives them that alarming feeling, that sort of just, we have to start running with him at the snap. And that's our step one of how we're conceptualizing our whole defense. It starts with him. Right now, when you look at the Chargers offense, you probably start with I guess Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler, maybe Eckler more so. And that's plenty concerning enough for a defense. Obviously, those two are really productive. But they can both be more productive if the defense doesn't know that the ball's going to them all the time. If they had to worry more about what happens when they sell out to stop those two, and they can still focus on Allen and Eckler, even if Williams is on the field, but that'll only happen a couple times, because if you leave a single coverage corner on Jamison Williams, Herbert being the way he is going to land that bomb. And they were landing those exact plays with Tyron Johnson all the time his rookie year. And then because Staley, in my opinion, does not think things through, or at least last year thought things through wrong, he looked at Tyron Johnson and was like, oh, he doesn't know how to do adjustment routes. He's dumb as a brick. I can't get through to him with something. He's not a good route runner. It doesn't matter. You have Tyron Johnson running nothing but fly routes and post routes every single time he's going to be in single coverage. That's how you get 400 yards out of Tyron Johnson on 30 targets, because it's playing on easy mode. But the defense has no choice but to leave it there. They took him out and put in Jalen Guyton, and he doesn't have the actual ball skills, the actual getting open ability that Tyron Johnson does. So they just kind of forfeited the deep threat, got nothing in exchange for it, and they made the field small on themselves. So I think Jamison Williams would be making up for that sin many times over. And because I can't see Staley being truly dumb, I think it's either him or Olave at that pick.
Okay, so the Chargers, definite team to look out for, taking a receiver. Before we backtrack a second, looking back at your overall rookie top 50, you have Williams as your wide receiver 4. So checks in just ahead of Treylon Burks. And Jamison Williams at 5 overall. Breece Hall in a tier all to himself up at the top. And then you got Drake London, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and then Jamison Williams. Do you think if the injury hadn't occurred that Williams might be closer to 2?
Maybe. I don't actually have any real position on ranking those players within the tier. It's more like I'm indifferent generally, but beyond that, it comes down to what the teams are looking for. Like if some team has, two really good starting receivers who weigh 179 pounds, I'd say to that team, if you're looking for another receiver, maybe you should take Treylon Burks because you could use that 225 on the field. But for a team like the Packers, I think a guy like Olave or Jamison Williams would make a lot more sense because they already have Allen Lazard as kind of the big body in the middle of the field. So I actually have no argument against Jamison Williams as the top receiver in the draft. I don't have one against. I don't personally subscribe to it, but if someone said Garrett Wilson's the best, Olave is the best, Drake London, I just would say okay, fair enough. So yeah, I maybe I'll have a more hardline opinion on that group at a later point, but to me they're all basically the same right now. It's really hard to separate them. They have a lot going for them all and a little bit missing in each case. So none of them is like a Mike Evans or anything like that. They're all just like really good starters who aren't complete.
Right, and then you can kind of sort it out a little bit better after the draft once the landing spots are actually determined and like you're saying, if you're to flip the order a little bit and have Jamison Williams go to the Jets or something, then maybe you like Williams a little bit less as a result of that, the same way that we felt about London. London lands in a better spot suddenly. He might move up in those ranks. So
Williams at 10 would not be shocking to me at all.
Yeah, if they're going after Tyreek, you can't say that the speed is analogous 1-to-1 or anything with Williams, but that it goes to show you the type of receiver that they were trying to seek out at least a little bit.
Yeah. So while I projected, of course, Garrett Wilson to 10, Drake London to 11, James Williams at 17. I think Chris Olave would also make sense at any of those picks. I think he could pretty easily be the best receiver in the draft. Like I don't feel strongly enough to call it specifically, but he looks a lot like Torrey Holt to me. I think he's just about as easy of a projection as you can imagine at receiver. Like I cannot imagine Olave being anything less than a good starter. So he's in the mix there, and he's the same category as Jamison Williams, right? You want him outside, you want him downfield, you want the defense chasing him because he's hard to catch. But beyond that, Treylon Burks is who I projected for the Packers at 22. That's the next receiver here. And I think they should take Chris Olave at that pick if he's on the board, because specifically the Packers need some speed. They have the same problem that the Chargers do, and they're about to get exposed for it that much more now that Devontae Adams isn't there. It's like ideally you would have the balance, the downfield speed to make the defense always care. But absent that, a guy who always needs to be double teamed every play also can kind of, open things up a little bit. Now they don't have that. So I think Olave's speed would be almost crucial. I think it's a borderline like mandatory pick for them to make, but they don't seem to like skinny players in general. And at receiver, they seem to target denser players. So Treylon Burks is who I give them because he's 6'2", 225. I think he fits everything they look for, even though I don't think he's the most balanced pick or clearly better than Olave. So that's a case where I'm projecting something that I disagree with, but I do think it would go that way. And then I have Dallas taking finally Olave at 24, which they don't deserve that. Like they got bailed out with Tony Romo being an undrafted free agent. They got bailed out with Dak Prescott in the 4th round after they wanted Connor Cook in the 4th round ahead of him. They don't deserve Chris Olave to bail them out for Jerry mangling their cap and having to trade Amari Cooper. But it would be an awesome pick for them.
Yeah, and they also got bailed out a little bit in the draft 2 years ago when they were picking 17 and Ruggs and Judy went before CeeDee Lamb, so they ended up with the best one of those three as well.
I'd also call Micah Parsons a total bailout scenario too. That was like that guy's going like 2nd overall if they do that draft over. Jerry's taking him there because he specifically is like, I have too many linebackers. This isn't even a good thing. Like he just got bailed out by Parsons being LT. When what normally happened there is, you pay some sort of price for taking their 3rd first-round linebacker in 4 years. Like normally that's a bad process, but when you're Jerry, for some reason you get LT when you do that.
It worked out beautifully. I will give you that. Let's see. I guess there aren't too many other skill guys that you're projecting to go in this first round. No tight ends, no running backs, notably. as just kind of like an overall draft process, who are some guys that over the last couple of weeks or maybe since the combine that aren't skill position guys that have really kind of like flashed to you? Then these can be guys that are projected to go in the top 10 or anywhere in this mock.
So I didn't mean to skip him, but I also projected Desmond Ritter to the Saints at 16 because I just think it's the right call. I think it's similar to the Lions and Willis, right? It's like, yeah, you don't have everything you look for in Ritter, but if you are assuming that you're going to get a better chance next year, you're basically being greedy and guilty of hubris. So they should take Ritter at 16 and get him another offensive tackle with that other pick, which is what I projected. And Ritter's kind of interesting just because he's runs the 4.52. He's got 4 years of starting experience. If he's running a little bit and he's starting 17 games, then that puts him on the fantasy radar right there. And I happen to think he might be pretty good too. At least I like him a lot more than Kenny Pickett. But looking around, I guess for like pet favorites among the rest of the draft, especially on defense, I mean, I don't know what to make of these guys, but I'm interested in both of these skinny, fast safeties, the Michigan one, and then your guy, Lewis Sine. Is that how you say it? Sine? Sine. Okay. Yeah, those guys are pretty interesting because I think they might be sort of I don't think we know it yet, but they're part of this first wave of a new position, which is just safeties who are corners now, basically. And you look at that and you'd say like, oh God, this is going to be a total Louis Delmas case. Like these guys are going to snap themselves in half trying to tackle running backs at that weight. But yeah, him and the Michigan guy are pretty interesting to me. And they might be, this new hybrid corner who plays slot corner and safety and outside corner, all so you can always applying the amoeba principle to the secondary after doing the front seven previously.
Yeah, no, and both those guys are awesome. Like Dax Hill, Justice Hill's younger brother, mind you.
Really?
Yes. Couple of, I think they're both from somewhere in Texas, and I think Scene's actually from Texas as well, if I remember correctly. But Dax Hill, 5-star coming out of high school. I remember that. I remember being a little surprised that he had gone to Michigan. They had kind of hit a bit of a snag in their recruiting at that time, but he was the jewel of that class, and he obviously panned out extremely well. So I like his game. And Scene, like you said, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but the tape. The guy's an absolute thumper. The guy hits.
I think I had like half of your starting defense in this first round mock.
I mean, that means it's a good mock because, for several reasons. But yeah, Scene. I mean, there was a hit that he delivered in 2020 where he just completely leveled Kyle Pitts, who's just a zillion times bigger than him, but you can like hear it audibly, like the whole crowd is like, oh, when Scene delivered that one. So he's a bruiser. I would definitely, if I'm a team in need of a safety at that range of the draft late in the first round, then I'm hoping that my team grabs him. I'm a big fan of Lewis Scene. And then another guy used to be on Georgia, but ended up in. I wouldn't necessarily characterize it as greener pastures at Florida State, but he definitely got a chance to shine. Got the chance to be an every down player at Florida State, and that's Jermaine Johnson. So you have him going to Arizona at 23. He's really interesting to me. I think this is a class that's really deep at edge, and I think his ascent this year, really kind of like it takes it over the top as far as the edge guys available here.
Yeah, he's one of, like you said, a pretty sizable group of players who you could almost imagine pushing for the top 10 or something like that in different drafts. It's become, or I don't want to say it's become clear to me, but to me it seems like the more I look at this draft, as much as I was complaining about the top 3-5 picks, like that, I don't think the value is very good there. The value from like 10 to 25 or so is some of the best I can recall, and specifically at the edge position, because it's not just him. There's that Minnesota guy. I can't remember. He's got Mafe.
Mafe.
Yeah, he's pretty crazy looking. Karlaftis from Purdue. I think probably like a top 15 pick. So those two are guys who you would, I think, conventionally project as like right on the top 10 kind of range, especially if there was a bunch of teams in the top 10 picking edge rushers. There's that other. What's that other one? Maybe I'm not remembering another one.
edge
But
guy?
yeah, I think I was just thinking of Walker, and I already mentioned him, obviously. But yeah, so in addition to those guys, obviously Jermaine Johnson is pretty interesting, but I ranked him third for kind of the reasons you said. Like he's the same age as Mafe, but they're both a little bit older, I think, than the Karlaftis. And I guess you could almost call Jermaine Johnson like maybe a Jalen Phillips kind of prospect, something like that, where you're not locking him into the top 20 or anything like that. But if he goes in the top 12, you're not really like flipping the table or anything.
Right. You can totally understand the case as to why someone would be, sold on him, why they would be that high on him. Before we get on over, we're going to talk a little bit more into your fantasy rookie ranks, the top 50. But first, we got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. All right, so moving on in your rankings, as we've established, you had Breece Hall as your number one rookie to target, and then it's interesting, but I think it's a sign of the times mostly that we don't have a projected running back in the first round. I mean, this is a league now that didn't take Jonathan Taylor in the first round, and the list goes on. Although CEH, of course, did go 32nd in that draft, but point remains that running back it's harder. The bar is getting higher and higher to clear for these guys coming out of school to be a first round selection at running back. But even still, Breece is your guy to target. Do you have in mind, like where he's going to go in terms of the range in the draft? And do you have an ideal landing spot for him?
Well, the ideal would be, some good offense with lots of running back snaps available, but I don't know if that's going to be a realistic option for him. It's like if the Chiefs hadn't signed Ronald Jones and if they hadn't took Edward Helaire a couple of years ago, I'd say maybe them at 29 or 30, which would be awesome, of course. But more likely, I would say, and this would piss off a lot of people for a lot of reasons, but I think Detroit would make quite a bit of sense either at the 32nd pick or the 34th pick. And that would, of course, make people mad who are investors of DeAndre Swift. It'll make the anti-running back freaks mad. It'll make, I don't know, probably like Breece Hall investors mad. So it wouldn't make anybody happy, but that one I think would be a justifiable pick by the Lions. And they got two shots, 32nd and 34th to do it. Otherwise, I would guess Breece Hall goes to the Texans at 37, which of course would kind of suck. But I mean, maybe he gets so much use.
Yeah, I don't hate it too much.
Yeah, he'd average like 3.2 yards per carry and have 3 rushing touchdowns, but he'd catch 90 passes or something because there's just cooks and that's it.
The Najee Harris experience.
Yeah, he'll have a 17 target game before the first month is over.
So we're big Breece Hall guys, and hopefully he lands somewhere and that doesn't make everybody mad. Although some of that Detroit angle would be kind of funny.
I guess maybe the ideal, or not ideal, but Atlanta at 43 would be kind of interesting too, just because I think the deal there would be similar. It's like they suck. They're going to be giving the ball to a bunch of bums, or they give it to Hall, so they're going to give it to Hall.
Yeah, I mean, like I think expecting even 80% of what CP did last year to repeat itself this year is probably a bit overly optimistic. So yeah, I think they do need to restock that running back room. CP might give them one more good.
They have so much slack that they could have room for Pitts, Patterson, and Hall to be pretty productive in fantasy, just because they'll have such atypical usage rates for players in their position because the Falcons receivers are so ambitiously awful.
It is actually incredible what their receiver depth chart looks like. It unbelievable.
Cordarrelle's their best one.
For real though, but he's also their best running back. What a conundrum. So your second tier: Drake London, Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jamison Williams, Treylon Burks, and then Malik Willis. So all those guys expected to go in the first round, expected to go or they were in your mock. Let's move on over to tier 3. How tricky was sorting out this tier? It's a tier of 5-6 players. How'd you kind of come to these landing spots for guys like Kenneth Walker, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens?
Yeah, so all of them had good profiles overall, but somewhat incomplete. And in the case of Kenneth Walker, it's that he's not a big running back and he didn't catch that many passes in college. So he's good, I think, and I think he can definitely run, but that's just kind of that's quite a bit of pressure on the assumption that he can definitely run at a high level, because if he can't, and if you get a mid to low range outcome for his pass catching variable, then all of a sudden you got this running back who maybe he's pretty dangerous with the ball. Maybe he's the kind of player no one is exactly happy to have to chase as a defense, but maybe he can only play 400 snaps. Maybe he can only get on the field for 300, 400 snaps, and maybe he's in a rotation all the time. That's something that I worry about with Walker. Even though if some team did commit to him, I'd say, oh yeah, he'll do good now. Now that he's got the playing time assured, I'll say, yeah, he's going to do good now. But we don't know about that. And also, for what it's worth, I think all the 40 times, literally every single 40 time from the combine, just for running backs is wrong. And I think they're all too fast. So to me, I'm believing the 4.46 on Kenneth Walker, not the 4.38. And a 4.46 is fine at 211, but it's not something that makes me, just quickly look past the pass catching concern. So there's quite a bit of distance for me between Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, even though Kenneth Walker is pretty easily the running back too.
And I've seen, floating out there on Twitter, a decent amount of takes that I think like it's okay to like push back on any given narrative, because that everything needs to be explored one way or the other. But I think there's been so much criticism of Kenneth Walker's pass catching or lack thereof, having 30 career targets during his time in college and 19 career receptions. I think people are getting a little bit over fixated to where it's like he definitely can. This 30 target sample shows me everything I need, and you're wrong for just assuming that just based on the pure volume that he's not a good pass catcher. And you can't always assume one thing or the other, but I think at the same time, people are kind of bending over backwards to say that his pass catching sample is meaningful and actually projects well.
Yeah, as in all cases, I'm a moderate on this one because I think either conclusion in either direction is too aggressive. Like, we should have a non-applicable incomplete grade, something like that, for Kenneth Walker and his pass catching, because it's one thing to get the opportunity and fail, and it's another thing to never get the opportunity, because we don't know the reason that he didn't get the opportunity. Sometimes you don't get the opportunity because you don't have the ability. Sometimes you just were denied the chance, and we can't know which it is in his case. Like, I guess person's free to take a position, you can take a side, but no one knows. We're just guessing, and anyone who claims to have some sort of certainty to offer is making stuff up, probably. So I don't know how someone can say with any sort of confidence that he will or will not pass catch well in the NFL. But in the meantime, fact is, not just Michigan State, but Wake Forest too did not have running backs catching passes. This is not a case where he was pulled off the field like Ronald Jones was at USC to have Stephen Carr catch more passes than him. That never happened. So
the other running backs at Michigan State last year combined for 15 receptions.
Right, so he was their most active pass catcher at running back, and the other, especially in the Michigan State season, the crucial thing to focus on, I think, is that he left no slack. He took a workhorse role just as a runner alone. So it would have been a big difference, in other words, if he averaged 15 carries a game instead of 21 or whatever he did. But he left no meat on the bone as it was. There was nothing for him to do. Unless Michigan State runs 10 more plays every game, he can't categorically do more as a pass catcher because they already did everything. So if he was getting 14 carries a game and he's only catching, 1.25 passes per game, that's a big red flag. That's a much more concerning example than a running back who's taking 22, 25 carries, routinely pushing 30 carries a game and running for, 180 plus yards. That's a player who's doing everything asked of him.
Yeah, no, 100%. Just reeling off those statistical performances just takes you back to the fall and making a nice little DraftKings lineup with Kenneth Walker and building around that, hoping that he's going to run all over Indiana or something, and then he would. So looking elsewhere, so that sets the record on Kenneth Walker. Some of these other guys, some of these other buzzy players, I'd like to hear your thoughts on Skye Moore versus Khalil Shakir, because I think they're the two, smaller school receivers that are getting a decent amount, or one of them is getting way more buzz than the other, and it feels like the public is mostly missing the boat on Khalil Shakir.
Yeah, I'm plenty high on Skye Moore. Like I think I was an early fan of his actually, so I have no reason to push back against his hype. But it's puzzling to me that any process would look at Skye Moore and say this guy's a top 40 pick, that would look at Khalil Shakir and just sort of walk past. Like that's the reaction you get with Shakir, is people kind of just shrug at him and say, oh, whatever. And it's like, why whatever? He was a really, really good player at Boise State, and he fits in pretty obviously with a lot of the most popular modern NFL concepts. Like him in a Shanahan offense would be crazy. Like he's not built the way Deebo Samuel is, of course. So you can't give him this. You can't make him run between the tackles that way, and you can't give him as much volume as you would Deebo Samuel. But Khalil Shakir is a guy who you can just kind of put in motion most of the time, have him play in the slot quite a bit, and with that motion, you have a threat you're prepared to act on by giving him the toss when he comes across the motion. Like I guess Curtis Samuel maybe in Carolina, you could imagine Khalil Shakir working as. He had the 4.43 at 196, which to me is not distinguishable from a 4.41 at 195 that Skye Moore ran. So I think they're slightly different. Like I would still say Skye Moore is probably the better downfield threat between the two, but that's more because Shakir has very short arms, and I don't really want him trying to play, rebound drill on the sideline all that often. I'd rather have him on a double move where I'm hoping, the prior 6 curl and slant and drag routes that I got to him, maybe the corner's biting really hard on the double move and he gets open deep, even though it's not really his main thing. Like that's the only time I would have him going downfield. So Shakir, I think, projects the exact same way in the NFL as he did in college, which is just, a slot centric guy who gives you a lot after the catch, gets open constantly underneath. For an outside receiver, I think he could also thrive if you have a role more like what the Rams had with Robert Woods. Like I think Robert Woods is a pretty good comp for him too. So yeah, not a star. It's like him and Skye Moore. They both lack like that alpha star kind of sum of traits, but still clear starters, I think. And as far as that tier 2 and the other receivers in it, tier 3 and those other receivers in it, Jahan Dotson, he's the same thing. He's like skill set is beyond questioning. His athleticism is adequate, but 178-pound frame limits him from something, a guy 20 pounds heavier than him could do. So that's why he finds himself there, but still an above average starter to me. And then George Pickens, who I'm still high on. I just feel like there's more projection with him than some of the other guys that I'm willing to rank this high. It's like Dotson, there's nothing to wonder about with him. We know exactly what he is. With Pickens, you're kind of being forced to make the purchase decision without getting all of the details. Like,
didn't read the terms and services.
Yeah, you kind of got to like buy the house without the inspection kind of thing with him, but there's reason to do it anyway. Like there's reason to think like, yeah, he's gonna be good, even though he's a little skinny. It's like he's still young too. Like he can probably put on 10 pounds on a 6'3" frame pretty easily, especially given how young he is. And there's a chance that he does that without losing any speed. So if he's running a 4.47 at 195, that's not great or anything. I think it's adequate, first of all, but even though it's not great, he could get closer to great if he's more like 208 in a year and he's still running a 4.47,
Yeah, no, I like the way that you frame that, and Pickens.
He might not be. He might lose some of that speed, but he might not too. We don't really know.
No, that's true. I like the house inspection analogy there. So one guy that I feel like, especially after the combine, has snuck his way into a lot of people's first round mocks even, and is someone that people are across the board extremely high on. It was hard not to be captivated by his performance at the combine, but Christian Watson finds himself outside of your third tier into the fourth tier. Again, like you said, you laid it out in a way where even if a guy is listed above the other one in a given tier, it's not like a hard line type of rule. So in that tier, you've got guys like Bo Melton, David Bell, who tanked his workouts, Tyquan Thornton, who did well in his workouts, and then Christian Watson, the big guy out of North Dakota State. So what led you to put being maybe a little bit lower on him than the consensus?
I think Watson is actually a pretty easy projection. There's just a certain narrow range of possibilities I feel like with him, because when you have the 6'4" frame and you have the 4.36 speed, that there is a certain amount of currency that won't depreciate or whatever. Like, you can use that player for certain things, and I think that usage is pretty obviously the way the Packers use Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Like, he can do that. That's like his worst case scenario, but I also think it's pretty close to his best case scenario, because he did not really function as an underneath or intermediate receiver at North Dakota State. Like, he basically just kind of went deep all the time. And so he put up totally okay numbers, but he was a redshirted player, so he's a year older than a lot of the players we're comparing him to, maybe more. Don't really know on that one. But also, it would have been a different matter if there was nobody in the North Dakota State offense who was catching underneath passes, but there usually was. There was usually another guy in the offense who was kind of, you'd see he had more like a 10, 11 yards per catch kind of average compared to Watson at like 23. So he's only catching something like 2.5 catches a game, and he's just going deep every time. That's just Valdes-Scantling to me. Like, and the question is, like, can you do anything in those first 20 yards? At North Dakota State, he didn't really, and that he's a year older than the competition doesn't make me more eager to take a leap of faith there. And not just that, at 208 or whatever he is, that's actually pretty skinny for 6'4". So if you add 20 pounds to his frame to get him more, sorry, not 20. If you give him 12 pounds to his frame to make him basically the same weight at the same height as Drake London, is he still running that 4.36? Are you still thinking of him as a specifically fast guy, or is he becoming, in front of your eyes, more of a possession receiver? And if he has to become more of a possession receiver, can he actually play as a possession receiver, or does he only know how to go fast in a straight line and catch the ball 50 yards downfield? So there's a lot of stuff that I think we have reason to believe Watson just can't really do, as much as there's other things that we can be pretty much certain he can do. So I think he's just he can give you efficiency in big plays on a moderate level of targets, but I don't think he'll give you consistency in any particular sample size. And I think if you give him more than 100 targets in a year, you risk overexposing him quite a bit. Yeah,
no, that's a really good take on him. That's an interesting detail as it pertains to like his functions within that North Dakota State offense. Does he have the potential worry of being the next Antonio Gandy Golden?
I don't think so. Not that I know what went so wrong with Gandy Golden. I don't get it at all. But I think
so. It won't be that bad. But
no, it won't be that bad. And at the very least, Watson's quite a bit faster than Gandy Golden. Gandy Golden was pretty fast for a guy as big as him. Watson is just fast, just on its face.
No matter how you cut it. Okay, that checks out.
But I don't think he's better than Alec Pierce and Thornton. I'd rather have Thornton with his 4.28 at 180 than the 4.36 at 208. So I'm not a Watson super fan, as you can tell.
Okay, I can dig it, because it things were starting to get a little bit like hyperbole.
Oh yeah, you hear Megatron comparisons.
Yeah,
that's funny. That's funny.
It was
getting like 30 pounds lighter or something.
Oh boy, yeah. Come on now. Let's see. Looking elsewhere, where is your first tight end in this class? Because people have been digging the depth on this tight end class, but where does it begin?
I really expected to like this tight end class more, but Isaiah Likely bombed. He was someone that I had pretty high hopes for, but he was like 235 running a 4.85. It's not going anywhere. Trey McBride is the by default tight end one, especially for fantasy, because he's very busy as a pass catcher at Colorado State. And I think as a fantasy pick, he's fine depending on the price, but I worry that he's getting not star treatment exactly, but that sort of like fan favorite territory where the market gets amplified a bit for lack of competition.
Yeah,
Like
like people tweeting stuff like you're not high enough on Trey McBride.
Well, it's like he's an easily likable enough player, and then we're also thirsty for a standout tight end. So it's like if he's the only one laying around, I think people have a tendency to sort of look at a guy like him and start seeing star qualities when actually it's just a bad class, and he's maybe the best one in it. So I think his best case scenario is something like Owen Daniels, and I think his worst case scenario is quite a bit less than that because when I watched Colorado State tape of Trey McBride, first of all, his production is very good. Like, there's no doubt about it. By any standard, it's very good. But there's a certain thing lacking, and that's explosiveness. There's no explosiveness in his numbers either in terms of yardage or touchdowns. He only had one on like 100 catches last year. So he's putting up like 2002 era Keyshawn Johnson numbers in this offense that's averaging like 20 points a game. And nobody's really producing. Dante Wright's the only other good player on that offense. And he's an underclassman, smallish slot back kind of receiver. So McBride had a lot to do. There was all this slack because Colorado State sucked. They were losing all the time.
Horrible.
So they're falling behind in these games, and they keep trotting out these big I formation looks with McBride running at the inline position where he's matched up against some middle linebacker a lot of the time. They're giving him a lot of play action looks, and he's getting these 9, 10, 11-yard gains over and over and over. And when you watch, it's kind of a cloud of dust sort of thing. It's not like he's taking a 4-yard screen and then juking out 3 guys to grind his way to 10 yards. He's catching like an off play action 9-yard route and then going down after another yard or 2. And then they do that 10 times a game and they score 17 points. So that's not threatening a defense. And I'm wondering what would have production looked like if the defense had any reason to care, like if Trey McBride catching 95 passes or whatever he did last year made 5 of those teams that they played lose in the process, that's a very different look. But as it was, they were basically bored and just kind of like toying with Colorado State. And
it almost feels like it's like Steve Adazio, the coach, saw like we can take what the defense is giving us and just like build our whole identity around them, like literally just volunteering to just give up like the
one
chain
touchdown
moving and then stop. Yeah, that's touchdown. Insane. On like 130 targets, like 90 catches.
That's got to be a record. Record.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly not a good one to have.
So I'm not going to be the person buying McBride in drafts. I just don't think the upside is high enough, and I think the risk is understated. So I'm probably not getting any tight ends this year, but we're down to like Ruckert from Ohio State and Otten from Washington, just as kind of like by default because there's no competition after that.
I like Jelani Woods just because he's weird. Like, he's so weird.
He is interesting, but I guess it's like he's got that O.J. Howard problem where he can't really function in the first 10 yards. And then it's like, is some team going to give him – are they going to commit to building their offense in a way to giving him 10-plus yard seam routes, running posts against safeties? I bet Woods could be pretty dangerous doing that, just like I bet O.J. Howard could. But, yeah, if some teams like we run – we do more like the Evan Ingram kind of tight end usage here. I think Woods could, well, not that anyone could do well with that, but Woods might look a little more awkward if he has to like play in the first 8 yards a lot,
Right, because his selling
he is interesting
being
though.
6'7" and
who he compares to? You probably remember this guy, and no one else probably does. He compares to Leonard Pope.
And Nick Whalen favorite even.
Really?
So yeah, just a fan of Giants. Leonard Pope. Shout out to him. I don't know what he's up to these days, but obviously a University of Georgia great and just iconic like early 2000s aesthetic tight end guy.
Yeah, that was way before we had the amount of data on athletic metrics and stuff that we do now. So there was more left to myth and legend. And I remember Leonard Pope, and people were like, dude, Jesus, he's 6'8" and he runs like a 4.6. He's going to catch 20 touchdowns. This might be Randy Moss at tight end. And we found out like, actually, it's bad to be 6'8". We didn't consider there was a cliff there where the returns diminished, and we're sorry.
Yeah, Leonard Pope was deserving of the Ed Too Tall Jones nickname.
Oh yeah, definitely.
In essence. So I think that's a pretty good signal that we've covered all the ground that we needed to on this episode of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Again, brought to you by our friends over at Blue Wire. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/